He's a police chief in Kentucky. His career as a law enforcement officer was derailed due to his own actions for a couple of years. He's here to talk about the trauma from his childhood, combat, the adrenaline of being a police officer, how that negatively impacted him, and what he did to resurrect his life and career after. Welcome to the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. In the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, we are joined by special guests talking about their experiences, the realities of investigating crimes, plus those who have experienced horrendous trauma. Police, first responders, military, and victims of crime share their stories. Hi, I'm John J. Wiley. In addition to being a broadcaster, I'm also a retired police sergeant. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com, and also like us on Facebook. Search for the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. The Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is brought to you in part by Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio chat app. By the way, download the app today. It is free. And also join us in Breakfast with Champions, also free. I'm there almost every day of the week, every weekday morning. It's a great place to educate yourself, get some motivation, inspiration, and make friends from all over the planet. That's the Breakfast with Champions rooms in the Clubhouse drop-in social audio app. Get it today. It is free. Both are free. Get more details online at thebwcinfo.com. Joining us on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show, Chad Martin. He is a police chief, and I'm giving all the hand signals here in Kentucky, and I won't hold that up against him, I promise. The interesting thing about his career was it was derailed for about 2 years due to a speeding incident, which we'll talk about. Childhood trauma played a role in this. Some trauma from being a veteran. Police adrenaline and trauma all affected him negatively. And I think what's really powerful about his story is how he built his life afterwards. Chad, thanks so much for being a guest on the show, and thanks for telling your story. Oh, and lastly, thanks for your service. Very much appreciated.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity.
It's good to have you here. And I'm not often I get to talk to chiefs. Most of the time it's been retired chiefs, and the same with officers regards to rank, usually retired or former, because they're not able to talk about a lot of things. So I'm glad you can. And we're talking about some things that, quite honestly, a lot of departments and a lot of people don't want to talk about, where you kind of went off the rails. We'll get to that in a moment. How long have you been in law enforcement?
I started in 1998.
So you are a rookie, Chad, because I started in 1980. So that means I'm a lot older than you.
Yes, sir. Still
it just
learning.
means I haven't died yet. That's the main thing. So you started in the late 90s. Before that, you were, of course, a child, which we'll talk about. You went into combat. Was it the United States Navy? Was that what it was?
Well, like I said, I don't think the Marines and Army would use the term combat for the Navy guys, but I was in the Persian Gulf right after the war and aboard a Spruance-class destroyer doing some intel operations.
Gotcha. And I get it. My dad was a career Navy guy, and his tombstone, it originally said a Vietnam veteran. He insisted that be taken off. He served in that era, but he didn't serve in combat. And I'm not going to split hairs with you, Chad, but there's a lot of guys in World War II in Korea that were in the Navy that saw a lot of combat. So we can argue distinctions all day long, but I get your point. Did that play a role in your going into law enforcement?
Yeah, my dad was actually a Vietnam vet on submarines, and I would always tell people that if you saw the definition of patriot, you'd see his picture beside it. So that kind of shaped a lot of my childhood of looking up to him and kind of wanting to follow in those footsteps.
Gotcha. And that's the way my dad was as well. And he's pretty quiet about it. He didn't talk a lot. And as a matter of fact, I got to go back to my police career. I was trained by a lot of combat veterans, Vietnam combat veterans, and then we had a few command staff that were Korean War veterans. So they had a profound impact on me, and they really knew policing. They really knew policing in Baltimore. Was that your experience?
Well, I think that if you make it through the military and transition into law enforcement, that jump is a lot easier, I think, than somebody that is coming in from, the college world or corporate America. That structure that's already put in place and just that embrace the suck attitude, you've already got that. So I think that makes it a lot easier.
It does, and it's a paramilitary organization, and a lot of the ranking and chain of command, which is a term used a lot. I'm not a military veteran. I always say I was a Navy brat, and if I had to do it all over again, I probably would have enlisted in the Navy. Think about it, Chad. I was a pain in the butt. I was a lousy student. I was always under my parents' thumb, and it's like I could have been someone else's problem and could have learned a skill. I could have had food and health insurance paid for.
That's a lot of what you're saying is kind of my childhood, and that's exactly what I thought. I thought, I'm going to get a ticket out of here, and I'll use the U.S. Navy as my ticket out.
And you're not alone. There's a lot of guys. I say guys, that's men and women, have done the same thing for whatever reason. And I don't know this. You're from Kentucky, and Kentucky is known as a landlocked state. They don't have access to an ocean. But there's a lot of people from Wyoming, Montana, Indiana, Ohio that are in the United States Navy, and thinking, how did you decide to go there instead of another branch?
I think Dad was the inspiration for that one. I actually had walked into the Marine recruiting station and decided that at that time in my life, I was looking for structure. I was looking for being the best, and I wanted to associate myself with respect, even if it was respect that I had not earned. It was just provided, and the Marine Corps showed that this is where you go to be respected, and this is the top of the chain. And walked into that recruiting station, said, guys, sign me up. I'm in for 4. I just want to make sure I know what I'm doing. And they said, you'll do what the Marine Corps needs you to do. And I'm like, well, the Navy guys over here said I could sign a contract and pick a job. And they're like, well, that's the Navy. And I thought about it for a split second. I think I'm going to walk back across that hall and pick that job out.
I'm sure a lot of our Marine veterans would sit there and say, maybe you made the right choice. And I know a lot of great police that were Marines. I know a lot of great civilians that are Marines. And once a Marine, always a Marine. And I'm a firm believer, if you served in the military in any capacity, here's what I always tell people, and we could talk about this till the end of time. You signed a promissory note that I'd be willing to go to combat if needed. It wasn't your call whether you showed up in combat or not. Someone else had that decision. You made yourself available, so you get accolades for that.
Thank you, sir.
And it's important that people realize that. And a lot of times, and we'll get into your story in a moment, a lot of times veterans will say, well, I didn't see combat. And, well, that wasn't your call. That was someone else's call. That was someone else's decision. So being there and being part of the team, and not everybody can be in the front lines, not everybody can be infantry. There's a whole lot of things going behind the scenes that got to make that happen. So you left the Navy after a successful career, I'd imagine, and then you went into police work. What department did you start with?
Well, I started with Lexington Police. It was about 550-man department.
And that's an agency we don't always think of as being large, but 550 men is a good-sized agency. It may not be Baltimore, it may not be Chicago, but I'm telling you, I do read a bit, and Lexington has its tough spots.
Lexington has a lot of tough spots, but they seem to get overshadowed by the great basketball and football and horse racing that seems to take on most of the news spots. Yeah.
And that's the thing. And one of the things we're going to talk about when we return on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show is, I always say this, the majority of my career was boredom. But there were times where you go from absolute boredom to out of control adrenaline dump to boredom to adrenaline dump, and sometimes multiple times a day. And yes, I did see a lot of action. Do you want to be a guest on Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast? It's really quite simple. And before you get into this notion that I'm not a cop, I wasn't a cop, I don't have something to contribute. Well, the show is about investigating crime. That's one aspect of it from the real life perspective of those who did it. And then it's also about trauma, how trauma impacted them. Often crime-based, but not always. Our guests quite often are law enforcement officers, other first responders, military, victims of crime, their spouses or survivors, talking about how trauma impacted them, what happened, how it affected their lives, and how they rebuilt their lives after. If you want to be a guest, just contact me. It's really simple. Send an email to jay@letradio.com. That's jay@letradio.com. Or go to letradio.com and the Contact Us page, and you can get me right there as well. We return to our conversation with Chad Martin. We're going to talk about his childhood, the adrenaline rush of policing, and how that almost led to his downfall as far as being a police is concerned. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Did you know that there are people earning $30,000 or more per month from Meta or Facebook? Did you know that you can too? All without breaking the time bank. Learn how to work smarter and not harder on Facebook. Get step-by-step instructions on what to do and what not to do. Start with a free membership. Get details at letbreak.com. letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
Be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free, and be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk radio show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Return our conversation with Chad Martin on the Law Enforcement Talk radio show. Chad is a police chief in Kentucky. What city, what town? Not really important. What is important is his story. He's also in the movers and shakers for VIPshields.com. That's VIPshields.com. You can reach out and contact him there as well. So, Chad, we talked about you being in the Navy. We talked about you starting with Lexington Police Department. We'll get back to that in a moment. First, you had a childhood that you're kind of escaping. Was it dramatic? Was it traumatic? Was it notable?
I'd say it was definitely outside the norm. When you look at childhood, I'd say there are people that can definitely say that mine was unusual and traumatic. And there's some people that have gone through some traumatic stuff that said mine would have been a walk in the park and they would have traded me.
Right.
But this one was mine.
Was it bad?
Well, my mom and dad were great. They came from troubled homes, but it was two people that left a bad home to start their journey together and never got treatment for what they had lived through. So they brought that baggage into this relationship and were doing the best they could do. But about when I was 6 years old, my dad, being a Navy veteran, had a previous marriage and had a child through that marriage, and he didn't have custody for many years. And I think this stepbrother of mine was about 12 when I was around 6, and Dad finally got custody of him, brought him into the household, and he had come from a very traumatic, just awful childhood. And that great saying of hurt people, right. I think I became his target for about the next 6 years.
Yeah. I know you really don't have to go into details. I can imagine. Here's what I say to a lot of people, and this is why I don't like, and I'm not picking on Hallmark Channel, but it's like they go through some really rough stuff, and then they meet the love of their life, and everything's hunky-dory. There's a white picket fence, they live happily ever after, and life is not like that for most of us. We go through a lot of stuff. It sounds like you went through a lot of stuff in your childhood.
Childhood was, I think, something later in life I look back on and say, maybe this is where it all started. But there was a lot more roller coasters in between those two that, that point we're at now. And there can be contributing factors, but not 100%. I'm never going to say that this is what caused everything in my life, but I see the contributing factors now.
I'm glad you said that, Chad. For a long time, I tell people, and I like analogies or metaphors. I had like an arterial bleed, and I was bleeding all over my daughters. I was bleeding all over my ex-wife. And instead of addressing the arterial bleeds and that was damaging people, I was so focused on what caused it. You don't understand. I'm this way because of this, and blah, 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 and whatnot. And the buts, you don't understand. And realizing afterwards that I was ruining everything that was important to me.
Yeah, I did pretty much that same self-destructive behavior and could not understand somebody that had a mindset that was focused on high achievement and career-orientated, how this was all just going up in flames and how I got here.
The other thing is, and I guess this is a question, I wondered why I seem to have so much willpower in certain areas of my life, but this is one area I couldn't seem to fix. I couldn't will my way into not reacting to certain things. Was that a good way of explaining for you?
Well, I don't think it was on the reaction side. Mine was more of maybe the root cause of adrenaline seeking, looking for things in life where I could mentally check out. And I found that through motorcycle road racing, martial arts, the time in the military, like anything where you needed a volunteer that was going to go do something that, had some danger to it, sign me up.
Right.
These are the things that I'm looking for. And it was during those periods we say, hey, I'm all in, I'm all focused at the task at hand. I got to check out, and I didn't realize what I was checking out from until many years later.
My ex-wife, bless her, she would call those things mini vacations, and she didn't see the ones at work. When I was at work, by the way, I knew what my role was. I was fine. I was good. It's when I got retired and things got really quiet and I started thinking a lot that became a real issue. During your career, you got sidelined for a couple of years. Is that when the troubles for you really came to attention?
Yeah, as I started my career in the military, I promoted quickly. I was put in supervisor roles, and as a young kid, I thought I'm on the fast track for success. So I expected to carry that same, type of success into law enforcement. And starting out with my agency, I got assigned to a low-income, high-crime area where drugs, shootings, stabbings, it's a weekly occurrence. So I'm going to go out and I'm going to be the greatest cop. I'm going to put people in jail. I'm going to lock up people. And all of a sudden, I started taking the critical incidents from the job on the day-to-day, pile them on top of the trauma from childhood, and then I start thinking, on my off time, I'm going to start self-medicating. I'm going to continue this motorcycle addiction, get into road racing.
God, you're so much like me. You're so much like me, Chad.
All of a sudden, the high school sweetheart marriage survived 4 years in the military, fall apart, find myself divorced, and start getting in trouble at work, performance issues and, not treating people correctly. I'm like, how did I end up here? This is not what I expected.
And I don't watch a lot of these dash cam videos for reasons which you'll understand in a moment. But people ask me when I have, they're like, what's your opinion about this guy? And I'm thinking my first reaction is, well, he was probably a great cop for a long time. And now all of a sudden he's losing it with people. He's mouthing off. He's saying stupid stuff. He's doing things he shouldn't do. More than likely, it's a really, very damaged individual and no one's helping that person.
And that's something that I wouldn't figure out until I'd say in the last couple years. So at the time, I'm trying to figure out how I'm self-imploding, but it's everybody else's fault. So these people in Lexington just don't get it. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to check out. I'm going to go to a new agency that's 45 minutes north, and they pay better atmosphere. I'll just leave these guys behind, get me a clean slate and start over, only to see that those troubles followed and just amplified at the new agency.
Well, there's an old saying that I can't take credit for. If you put a meatball on a bus and you ship that bus that travels to California from, let's just say, Florida, when it gets its final destination, you get off, it's still a meatball. Nothing changes. It's just locations changed.
Yeah, that's what I found with going to a rural agency that was very slow-paced, very different atmosphere, walking in with the arrogance of this ex-military guy doing high-speed stuff in the big city and trying to change this agency to be more like we were. They didn't want to be like Lexington. They were a small agency.
We say all the time here in Florida, you're welcome here, but leave all the way things used to be in other states the way they used to be up there, and don't bring them down here and make us change. This is the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We're going to turn to our conversation with Chad Martin in a few moments. He is a police chief in Kentucky, and you can find him online at VIPshields.com. That's VIPshields.com. Don't go anywhere. We will be right back. There's a couple ways you can stay in touch and keep informed of what's going on with the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Number one, go to our website, letradio.com. Sign up for our email newsletter. It's real easy to find. I promise we don't spam you. I send out about one email every 2 weeks or so. And there's also a feature called broadcast channels on our Facebook page where we send messages directly to your inbox, directly to your messenger. Real easy to sign up for. Make sure you like or follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show Facebook page. And up top, you'll see broadcast channels, one for free podcast versions of the radio show, another one top post of the day. So you too can stay informed quickly, easily, and best of all, like always, free.
Imagine contacting millions of people every month using Facebook from the comfort of your home or business. How much would you increase the success of your business or service if you could do that? I do that every day, and so can you. Plus, earn a separate revenue from Meta. Learn how to work smarter and not harder on Facebook. Get step-by-step instructions on what to do and what not to do. Start with a free membership. Get details at letbreak.com. letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
Return our conversation with Chad Martin on the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Chad is a police chief in Kentucky, and he is also a United States Navy veteran, and he is one of the movers and shakers for VIP Shields. Their website is VIPShields.com. That's VIPShields.com. So we talked a little bit, Chad, about the trauma of childhood, and one thing you said that was really resonated with me was, I remember saying a prayer, and I said this prayer forever and ever and ever, and it's the Lord's Prayer. And in that prayer, there's a line that says, forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And for a long time, I was not able to do that until I realized that my parents were great. But until I was able to sit there and say, these people did the best they could with what they had. And when they learned better, they did better. Until I was able to make that leap, I wasn't going to get anywhere. Was that a fair assessment with you?
Well, I guess my assessment came many years later, because I was at the time where I was still not figuring out what was wrong, what was going on, besides just going down in flames. And I still was blaming everybody else. And, it could have been anything I was doing.
How typical is that when you say it's everybody else's fault? If they get in line and do things the way I want, we'd be fine.
Absolutely. The world would be great if you just asked me. I got it all figured out.
Yeah, I was the guy who crashed and burned pretty hard, and I thought I had it all figured out. Look, I was really good at what I did. I was a really good police officer. I'm very proud of what I did. I'm thrilled to work with the people I did. I get the same feeling from you. But it wasn't the good stuff that was the problem. It was the negative things that caused me so much problems. Was that what happened to you? Yeah,
the next agency was just adding to the stress. Like I said, not fitting in, not figuring out why I'm not excelling in this police career. So I continued to, self-medicate, do the adrenaline junking, and the motorcycle was my only place that I could go check out. I got into road racing where I had my race bike. I'd go to the racetrack on the weekends. I kept me a 900 Ninja decked out for the street. It was my street bike, and I'd got me a new girlfriend. Life was, nothing but motorcycle and girlfriend at this time. And that same recipe ended up causing me problems where I took the bike out one afternoon, doing well over 100 on a highway, just checking out, just going for a nice cruise. To me, when you're used to doing 160, 170 on a race course, that 105, 120 going down the highway, that's just like doing 65 to the average person. But apparently, when you go past an officer who's sitting on the on-ramp and he radars you in the back as you go past and never knew you passed him, that's not a good outcome. So it appeared to this officer that I was fleeing. I'd never seen him as I went through. About 12 miles later, I decided to slow up. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw a line of police cars coming. And I moved over. Figured they were going somewhere important. But when I moved over, they moved over. And next thing you know, I found myself in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And ended up getting arrested for under the assumption of, fleeing from a police officer. And I tried to tell him, I didn't know I was fleeing from anything. I was speeding. And that took me about 2 years to work its way through court. But like most police agencies, you bring a situation like this into the command staff, and they're going to tell you, hey, you need to go figure this out on your own, but we're not going to have time to wait for you to figure this out. I ended up resigning and fought that battle as a civilian.
And it's a tough battle, too. And look, I'm not saying this from a judgy position, Chad. I think you get me by this point. The world judges us by our actions, not by our intentions. So what looks like this is that until it's proven otherwise. And one of the things I always, and this took me a long time, and this is part of my police background. When someone got arrested for something, my first reaction was, well, he must be guilty. He must have done something wrong. But otherwise, that wouldn't be happening. Where there's smoke, there's fire. And then I realized a lot of things that we see are not always as they seem to be.
And that was what I struggled with, because everybody loves a good story about, police officer done wrong. So the media picked it up all the way back to my childhood. Towns picked up newspaper articles showing my age and made the local news of this officer that ended up getting arrested. And I felt betrayed by the other officers, because these guys turn their back on you. And I'm like, hey, we're supposed to be a family here.
Right.
And to me, I'm thinking, you guys know me better than this. I didn't do this. This wasn't the intention. And at the same time, they're looking at it from, hey, this guy wasn't the best team member anyway. I didn't realize the problems I was causing. So it was easy for them to say, you brought embarrassment upon our profession. You brought embarrassment upon the agency. Good riddance.
Did you feel that way about yourself? Did you feel that way about your actions?
I didn't. So I'm still processing. I got caught speeding. Yes, I was wrong. I was speeding. I can't believe everybody's treating me this way, because I'm still in that moment of it's everybody else. It's not me.
Generally, when someone, and this is the way it used to be, I don't know how it is anymore. I read the newspapers. I'm like, we just had an incident in Detroit where an off-duty police officer with mental health issues shot two other police, uniformed police on duty with a high-power rifle. They shot and killed him. And I'm thinking, how does that happen? Where did we get to this point? So I look at some of the hiring standards. When you had an arrest record, let's just say fleeing and looting, or assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, whatever it was, or a crime of moral turpitude, theft, lying, and that nature, you were done. It was over. There was no coming back from that. And that was the way things were, right, wrong, or indifferent. It must have taken a lot for you to reclaim your path.
Well, I went from arrogant young police officer to third shift factory worker, working two part-time jobs, trying to just keep a roof over your head. And you talk about humbling. That was a humbling experience. And that was the start of rebuilding who I am and how I ended up here today. And I think there's no better formula than when you can't see your own faults, you just hit rock bottom and start over from scratch.
Yeah, something you've said many times in this interview is that you self-medicated. Look, I did that. I self-medicated with alcohol, and that became a problem in and of itself. And I'm not unusual. I'm not the only one. It took me a long time to realize that, but now I embrace the fact that I'm not the only one. When we talk about self-medicating, that's a pretty broad term, but I need it so I could go to sleep. I could not sleep. I could not want, and for a long time I did great, Chad. I had a psychological thing where I was pulling up the Velcro from the soft body armor, and I was transitioning mentally from cop J to dad J and husband J and all that stuff. And that worked great until it didn't work anymore. And then when it didn't work anymore, all I had left was booze.
And that's what I think was my ticket. Was I was proud that, I'm never going to show up at work having anything to drink, or I'm not having to drink before or after. Like, there's nothing that I feel like I need. But then those moments that I'm off, I couldn't go to a kid's birthday party without thinking, hey, let's have some beers. I'm like, what's a 3-year-old's birthday? Do you need to be having a beer? Like, well, when you're when you're so upset with just the current living conditions, that just little bit, you start thinking, all right, this just makes me happy. And when you start seeking happiness that route, that should have been the first red flag of like, hey, you're going down the wrong road to find your happiness.
And we're going to return that conversation in a few moments. This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. We'll return our conversation with Chad Martin in just a bit. The really good stuff about how he rebuilt his life is heading away. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Remember when news was free? Be sure to check out the Newsbreak app. It's free. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. Newsbreak is your #1 local news app for current events, free live news for you and your community. Download the Newsbreak app today for free. And be sure to follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast on the Newsbreak app. That's the free Newsbreak app. Be sure to look for and follow the Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show and podcast.
Learn how you can be ultra successful on Facebook and possibly earn an income from Meta. Learn how to work smarter and not harder on Facebook. Get step-by-step instructions on what to do and what not to do. Start with a free membership. Get details at letbreak.com, letbreak.com. That's letbreak.com.
This is Law Enforcement Talk Radio Show. Return our conversation with Chad Martin. Chad is a police chief in Kentucky. Yeah, he's a chief of police, a pretty big position. And he talked about the childhood trauma he went through, being a United States Navy veteran, working in 2 police departments, and then crashing and burning due to adrenaline, due to trauma, due to a lot of things, self-medicated alcohol, speeding, and his career got derailed. And he's been able to rehab that career. You can find out more details about him. He's one of the movers and shakers also at VIP Shields. Their website is vipshields.com. Chad, I jokingly told someone this the other day, and I know this is not my story. I said the worst thing that ever happened to me was going to AA, because I changed my entire life, and I was not ready for this. I was not into it. I didn't buy any of it. I'm like, no, you guys are full of it. No, not only no, but you know what? No, I'm not doing that. That's good for you. And here I am, almost 33 years later. I've been sober. I'm happy. I got a productive life because I embraced the principles they talked about, a lot of which is religious-based and psychological-based. There had to come a point in your life where you're saying, you're chief of police now. If you had a guy, let's say a man or woman working for you, that was exhibiting the signs you were doing on the job, you'd have a conversation and say, this isn't going to fly. This is not going to work. Something's got to give, right?
Absolutely. And that is what I wish I had back then. The red flags that you exhibit as a young officer, but there was no training in place back then. This stigma with police mental health and being transparent and vulnerable, I mean, these are new principles that we're seeing come out now in policing that, I'm guaranteed you didn't see them. There wasn't command staff coming to sit down with you in a one-on-one conversation back in the 80s.
If it was a one-on-one conversation in the 80s, Chad, it was not good. You walked out with a piece of your you-know-what missing.
Yes, sir.
It was not good at all. And look, I had guests on the show, and this is how far we've come as an industry. And I believe we've made a lot of great progress, but we still got some work to do. There are officers who have been arrested and convicted for DUI. They've rehabilitated their careers and doing well and been promoted. Man, in my day, that was a career ender. If you didn't get fired or quit, you wound up being rubber gunned and no one ever saw you again.
And that's exactly the mindset that I took, that my law enforcement days were over, and I knew that I couldn't continue working as a factory worker. So I decided I was going to start a small business and learned about these laminates that you could put on glass for making glass stronger in case of like a break-in or bomb blast for security facilities. And I thought, well, what goes better than military and police backgrounds, get into security industry, start doing these window laminates and taking a patrol officer and throwing him into the world of business, thinking that was going to end well when you didn't have money, you didn't have business connections, you had no business training. that was just another one of those expectations of great success, and it was a struggle. I don't know how I convinced the girlfriend at the time to marry me, but now I'm looking at small business owner, new husband, new dad, and definitely hitting rock bottom financially and just wondering, what am I going to do with myself? I'm out of the law enforcement community for good. And just everything I tried to put my hands on ended up turning into a failure. So I thought I hit jackpot when I used my police background and this window laminate background, put the two together, and I said, you know what? I'm going to create a protective device for police officers that we can put in the police cars, and I'm going to make this patent application. Got a new invention. That took a long time to get through, but when I got that rubber stamp that said you've been awarded a U.S. patent, I thought it was like TV. You just walk into these business, pass them the patent, they write you a big check, and you sail off into the sunset.
Wait a minute, it's not like that?
Only to find out it's not like that at all.
Wait, you don't get the big check and the white picket fence and 2.5 kids and live happily ever after and drink tea and go, ha, ha, ha?
Let's just say my wife was so tired of hearing about it, she started quoting the line from, I think it was Jerry Maguire.
Show me the money.
Like, show me the money. Show me the money. Stop talking about it. And year after year after year of everyone telling me, no thanks, great idea, no thanks. I wasn't showing her the money, and I had no way to explain to her how I was going to buy school clothes for the kids this year.
Yeah. So that compounds the negative feelings, because I don't know about you, a big part of, and as people love to say that it's a negative, I don't believe it is, was a big part of my identity is being able to provide for my children. And if I can't do that, then I feel like I've failed.
And that's where I was. I had failed at military, I'd failed at police, I'd failed at small business, I'd failed at inventing, I failed at being a dad. So I was at my rock bottom, and my wife was brought up in a Christian home, and she was always the rock of the family. And I had finally got to that point where I said, I can't do this, and I'm helpless, and said, I'm going to start exploring a little bit of these words in red that you're talking about. And that was the transformation that I needed to start seeing things for what they were, start figuring things out, and putting that arrogant young kid in check and realizing, hey, you've done all this on your own. This ain't nobody's fault but yours. And started coming up with a path to change things, get back on track.
Well, my hat's off to you. You have, because look, we all have our dark days, and there's a saying that I actually don't like, but we've survived 100% of the really bad stuff, and that's part of what makes me who I am today. I wish, as I look back, that those things never occurred, but I don't have that kind of power. And I remember Chad shaving for, I swear to God, it was 3 years, shaving. And I'd have a little sticky note on the mirror. And the sticky note, someone prompted me to write this. It says, there is a God. I'm not it. And he or she does not need my help to go world go around today. I need to be put in my right place. You keep saying that arrogant young man. That sounds harsh, but that's how I was. I think age and circumstance and failures and all that stuff have humbled me.
Well, that was the best part of when you realize that you can't do anything on your own. You've tried and tried and tried, nothing worked. And then things start working out once you've relinquished control. You've got no way to take credit for that. And starting to show up at church and, change how I'm living, and stumbling across a guy that I used to work with years ago who tells me he's now a police sergeant at a department that had some high turnover. They're trying to do some rebuilding. And I've been out of the business for 10 or 12 years now. And he says, hey, you ever thought about coming back in? Well, thank goodness 2008 showed up and destroyed what little bit of a business that I had built. And I said, absolutely, I'd be looking to come back. And walked into a courtroom and had a misdemeanor charge of reckless driving on my record, and was able to get that expunged. And this officer was able to vouch for me to get me back in the door and start a rebuilding of everybody who thought they remembered me coming back in, I now have to reintroduce myself as the new person that none of you all know.
Right. And then you find yourself eventually becoming chief of police. Is that a crazy journey for a guy like you?
Oh, it gets even crazier. This is where, if you don't believe in miracles, then you won't believe this story. I switched agencies 2 more times.
That's
working
4
my way up
agencies.
from
That's 4.
that agency. So I decided I was going to get to a nice town that had some great benefits, and calls for service were more of, helping people get into their cars that locked their keys in, and just a nice neighborhood. So I was at home at this agency, worked there for about 5 years, and there was an election for a new mayor. The mayor came in and started changing some things, and the police chief we had at the time, he was ready to retire. He had put in his notice that he was going into retirement, and this new mayor didn't know too many people, so he decided he was going to open up the process for anybody internally could apply for.
Let me guess, position. You applied
as the third shift patrolman that nobody knew.
We have to end on that note because we're out of time. Chad, man, I do believe in miracles, and they happen every day. And sometimes I remind myself, some miracles just aren't pretty. But thank you so much for being a guest on the show. Very much appreciated.
You're welcome, sir. Thanks for having me.
This was the podcast version of the nationally syndicated Law Enforcement Talk radio show, and we are so glad that you decided to join us. Big thanks to our guests for telling their story on the show. 2 simple things you can do. Be sure to check out our website, letradio.com. That's letradio.com. And be sure to follow us or like us on Facebook. Do a search on Facebook for Law Enforcement Talk radio show, and be sure when you see a post that we put up that you like, that you resonate with, that gets your attention, be sure to share it with your friends. We'll be back in just a few days with another great episode of the show. See you then.